Good evening, everyone. We continue with Job chapter 33 with what Elihu continues in his discourse. But in this chapter, Elihu now directs his attention to Job. It begins in verse 1. However, please hear my speech, Job, and listen to all my words. This is not quite complete in its translation, but basically it says, however, the word please really means I beg you, literally giving that kind of an expression. I beg you, listen to my speech, my discourse, the things that I'm going to say, and listen to all my words. Now, understand this is an A and a B. The word speech here and the word words, which comes from the word davar, which we often hear in the prophet books when the prophet says, these are the words of God. The idea of words would be issues or matters. So the discourse is about what he has heard, and he really has to say something. And we continue from yesterday with verse 2. Behold, look, now I open my mouth. And as he opens his mouth, he says, my tongue in my mouth speaks. Uh, this word here, in my mouth, would be palate. You can see that this is also an A and a B. Now, as we go on, this is very much a very poetic discourse. He's going to say things two times, three times, but really trying to emphasize he is now speaking. He has to speak these words. And he describes that my words are from the integrity of my heart, uprightness. He has no malice of saying anything. It is from his mind. And my lips speak knowledge sincerely. So words, knowledge, they are equivalent in this case. So we have another A and a B. They are spoken with the uprightness of my heart, sincerely. So basically, Elihu is saying, just listen to me. I have no ulterior motives. I'm not here with any biasness. I am speaking honestly, right? Honestly. Now, verse 4 says this: the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Now, let me just explain this to you. There is no capital S in Hebrew. And this really means the ruach, the wind of God, right? The wind of God has made me, and the breath, and in this case, the breath here is a neshama. And it's the breath, which is also the wind. And both of these refers to the character. Neshama has the word Shem in it, which is name. And so basically, it's the character, the presence of God, or God Himself made me. And this idea of making is doing work, is fashioning, uh, and the breath of God gives me life. This is about who me is, right? The idea of me as Elihu acknowledges God as his creator. That's basically what he has said here. And basically, he's also saying, Elihu is saying, I'm just like you. I'm also created by God. Verse 5, he gives Job a chance to refute. Now, the idea of refute is about answering Elihu, or, well, I guess you could say that you could answer me, refute me, and it says here, if you're able to. Now, if you can means if you are able to do so. Answer me if you're able to do so. And this idea of answering or refute comes from the word shuv. It is to reply me. Return your comments to me if you're able to do so. Line up against me, take your stand. And basically, he's challenging Job. We now have a case to argue. Now, in the Hebrew sense, and even in Oriental sense, when you have a situation, now if you recall some of the ancient movies like Bao Jing Tian, when somebody needs justice, it is to present a case to the judge. And you find that Job has said, I want to plead my case. I don't understand why this is happening to me. I have not done anything wrong. And we have seen that being presented in the final chapter by Job. But Elihu is now coming out to say this. Look, I belong to God like you. Now, this idea, how would you say, in verse 6, this idea, I belong to God like you, uh, literally means I am like your mouth to God. I think that would be a clearer way. I'm like your mouth to God. Now, in another sense, you would say that I represent God as you requested. Now, these are two ways of translating. Both actually mean about the same. Right? He's saying, I'm here. You've asked for God. Well, I am speaking on behalf of God. I am going to represent you to speak to God. I'm going to represent God to speak to you. However, I too have been formed out of the clay like you. Behold, no fear of me should terrify you, nor should my pressure weigh heavily on you. It's not very clear in the English, right? It's not very clear in the English. But what is happening here is you find that Elihu is saying, the fear of me, right? The fear of me should not terrify you, should not intimidate you. Why? Because Elihu is speaking as a very wise young man. Where the three friends yesterday we have seen had nothing else to say. He says, don't let my, well, this is not my pressure. This is my, the word here should be my burden, my coercion. And basically, it is like, well, I guess you can say applying pressure, right? Applying pressure to force Job to answer. No, in verse 5, don't let this stance weigh heavily on you. So do not mind me, in not so many words. You have in fact spoken, while I listened, and I heard the sound of your words. Now understand the word here in verse 8. Although it is the standard word here, in the Hebrew, here means to listen to the sounds, to process, to understand, and then to do something about it. And he is now doing something about it. That is what Elihu is saying. He first declares himself. He says, I am pure. This means I am innocent, right? I am innocent. This idea of pure is clean, is righteous. It's like pure, right? Although this word is not pure like our modern day moral sense, he's saying I'm innocent without any wrongdoing. Now, this is important. Without any transgressions. I have not done anything that has upset God. I am, well, this word here is clean. And there is no, well, this word guilt is avon. There's no avon in me. And so both of this is his integrity, a pure character. He is not here out of malice. Verse 10. Behold, he invents criticisms against me and counts me as his enemy. Now, what this means is that Job is contending that God has Job is thinking that all these accusations against him from the three friends seems to have come from God, but that is not the case, right? That is not the case. He is a righteous man, and if he were an enemy of God, then Job would say that he would be rightly punished. And verse 10 is saying in a way where God has kind of punished him for something that he did not do. That God may have counted him as his enemy. He puts a feet into the stocks. He watches all my paths. And these are metaphor of the problems that Job has. Right? Job has. Behold, let me respond to you that you are not right in this. So this is a recount of Job's defense and his predicament. And then Elihu says, let me reply you. You are not right in this. The idea of not right here literally means he has gotten it wrong. Right? He has gotten it wrong. You are incorrect. You have gotten it wrong. And so he says this. This is a very important phrase that he has made. For God is greater than man. Well, this is not mankind. It should be man. Or mortal man. As Enosh, right? As mortal man. And so mortal man implies that man will die and man has his limitation and God is greater. And this instance is the defense for God. defense for God. And Elihu is now, I would say, rebuking Job in the way that Job has contended that uh, that it is unfair. And so Elihu comes out, and you notice one thing as we go along in the next few chapters, that Elihu never accuses Job of sinning like the three friends. Verse 13, he says, why do you complain to him or with him? Now we need to understand that Job is in incredible loss, and he has a turmoil in his mind. He is suffering from pain. He's lost his wealth, his family, and his health. Please do not forget the state of mind that Job was in. Although I have kept referring to the fact that God has declared Job to be blameless, upright, God fearing, and shun all evil, he is nevertheless very human. And he is under this microscope that Hasatan has come and dealt with him these blows. And Job just cannot understand this. So that would be the frame of mind that he has this outburst. And so Elihu says, why do you complain with God that he does not give an account of all his doings? You are now suffering, but God didn't say and did not answer you. Is that wrong? And that would be the attitude that Elihu is now trying to correct Job. Verse 14 says, indeed, God speaks once or twice, and yet no one notices it. Now we may have a, a bit of a challenge in the translation, but this would be okay. It says God speaks once and sometimes twice, and when God speaks, people may not notice it or regard it or see it, right? Or inspect it, or even realize it. And so this idea here is when God speaks, oftentimes man does not realize. And that would be Elihu's answer to Job. You may not have heard him. You have asked all these things, but have you sat down and waited on God? And Elihu expresses verse 15. No, God can speak in a dream, a vision of the night, when there's deep sleep falling on people while they slumber in their beds. So we have deep sleep and we have slumber. In a way, both are slightly different in sleeping. So one is a sleep where you are all into it and you can't wake up, and one that you can easily toss up. But the idea here is God does speak in a dream. This is Halom. Halom is a dream that you could have in a way very normal. But in this case, Elihu is saying this is how God works. It is always at night, and there is always a dream, and there is always a vision. And so we have an A and a B, two slightly different ways, but this is the mechanism that God speaks to man and prophet. When they are asleep, yet they are awake. Now, why do I say this? Is because whatever God speaks in a dream or a vision is not like a normal dream or a vision when people actually go to bed with. But in this case, in the deepest of their sleep, they are very awake and in very alert, but in a sleeping, dreaming mode. Now, I can't describe to you because I've not been there, but I'm just trying to explain what verse 15 is trying to say. Verse 16, then he opens the ears of people and horrifies them with warnings. Now, this is important. When Elihu says that this is the dream or the vision, please remember that it is not a chit chat with God. God always opens the ears of the people he wants to speak to. And this word horrifies, verse 16. Verse 16 talks about chastening. Now, this word horrifies them with warnings may require a little bit of explanation. It says this, he uncovers people's ears, and seals their affliction. Now, what does that mean? Elihu is really saying this is not God having a chit chat with you. When God gives a dream or a vision, this is really to let the person know. So you notice alert, ears are open, but it is about God's punishment to them. And this, I don't know why the translator used the word horrifies, but obviously the affliction, what God is going to chasten them, what God is going to discipline them is known, and maybe that is what's going to cause a horrifying thought. But this is not an accurate rendering. All right. So what Elihu is saying, don't think the dream and vision, but God would have been showing you that what is going to happen is going to be very grossly afflicting you. Verse 17. It says, in order that he may turn the person away from bad conduct and keep a man from pride. Well, this bad conduct from his, I would say, planned action. In verse 17, it really is trying to say this idea of turn a person away is restraint from that action that he's about to do and to cover. This word keep is to cover. I think cover is better, to conceal a man from pride. This is prevention. God appears to people in dreams and vision is to prevent them from doing further wrong. Now, I think this is interesting because I guess you can see how God came to Pharaoh, right? We have Genesis chapter 12 to Pharaoh, to Avimelech, both in Genesis. God came to these people in a dream and to stop them from going further to do the wrong thing. So verse 17 gives us this kind of a picture because God doesn't want them to make the mistake. So he keeps his soul back from the pit from death and his life from perishing by the spear, because sometimes these actions will cause wars to happen and people will kill one and then revenge another. A person is also rebuked by the pain in his bed and with constant complaint in his bones. And this is what he's saying, Job. This is a reminder. And then he says, so that his life loathes bread and his soul food that he should crave. And this is Job's predicament, right? Job's predicament. And more so in verse 21. In Job's case, his flesh wastes away from sight and his bones, which were not seen, stick out. He will become so thin that it is skin and bones. And that's what it means. Now, you notice the Hebrew language always gives a very vivid picture, very concrete. You can see a person who can't eat, and he is just losing himself. His muscles go away. He's purely skin and bones, and so it is his bones may not be seen, but is sticking out of his flesh. And so, very, very vivid imagery. Then his soul comes near to the pit. And this idea of pit, I think, would be useful to say this would be a ditch, this would be a grave, and his life to those who brings death. He will be close to dying. Close to dying. So he's describing a person that God can reveal himself and warn him before his dying breath. In verse 23, if there is an interceding angel for him, 1 out of 1,000, to remind the person of what is right for him. Now, what is right in this is yashar, which is this. What is upright? What is back on the right path, which is God's path? And so this whole explanation, at least in Job chapter 33, if there is one angel for him that is defending him for the good that he can do, out of 1,000 who is, this is 999 of them, who is against him in the court. This would be the antagonizer, the opponents, to remind the person. Now, this idea of reminding the person is to declare, I think would be a better word, to declare of the person of what is right to him. This is one right can defend Job, or one who is dying, who has done so much wrong. So this verse 23 gives us a very different picture of how the moral court of justice might appear in the heavenly courts of angels. And doing something right, which is upright, yashar, will give him a defense attorney or defense angel. And that one right can help him overturn the entire case. Verse 24, and he is gracious to him and says he would be God. And he would be gracious to this person who has been guilty and says, free him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. Now, this idea of a ransom is a bit of a different concept. Um, the idea of a ransom here is something that has been paid for, right? Something paid for, or something that is used to cover. And this would be the one right thing in verse 23 that will allow his defense angel to defend his case, and God will be gracious to him. Now, this word gracious means have favor. This is a very big concept. The idea of have favor is to spare him from death, going down to the grave. And when God has favor, it means that this man has found favor in the eyes of God. Now, this is the Hebrew expression. When God looks at this person and he has done one right thing in verse 23, the angel appeals for him and God sees it favorably and spares him from the grave. God will say, yes, his guilt is covered. Verse 25, let his flesh become fresher than in youth, and him return to the days of his youthful vigor. This is a return to his earlier days. And we will see this in chapter 42, verse 26. He will pray to God. Now, this word pray to God it's not the regular word for prayer. It is to entreat. Entreat. To plead, I think would be a good word. To plead to God. And in the old days, when they do this, in this prayer pleading, there will be an incense to be given up, to be burnt, to be burned. Now, if you know incense, right? Incense would be in maybe in a bowl, and incense comes in various forms, right? Various forms. And let's say you have frankincense and whatnot, right? And when you apply fire to it, right? You light it up in the fire. What will happen is that you would get the smoke, and that would be incense up to God. That would be the idea. And then God says here, and he will accept him so that he may see his face with joy, and he will restore his righteousness to that person. This whole aspect here is one of a pardon and forgiveness. And this is the ancient culture. When he is restored, he will sing to the people and say, now the idea of sing, I don't know why they use the word sing here, because it's not that word. Basically, this expression here uh, is to, how should I say? He will go around, right? I think this would be better. Go around to the people and say, I have sinned and perverted what is right. It is not proper for me. And this will be the public confession. And then to testify he has redeemed my soul from going to the grave, and my life will see the light. And this is to publicly testify of God's pardon. Verse 29, behold, God does all these things for a man 2 or 3 times. And this is what Elihu is trying to point to Job. Do you know if God is actually speaking to you? Do you see all these things that's happening? And now you notice Elihu has taken a different stance from the friends, right? And is suggesting to Job that perhaps what is happening to you is God trying to speak to you in some ways. Verse 30. Do you know that it is to bring back his soul from the pit so that he may be enlightened with the light of life, that his life will be more meaningful? And so, Job, pay attention, Job. Listen to me. Be still. Let me speak. Now, this word is be still. In verse 31, the idea be still is coming from the word to be dumb. Be dumb means cannot speak. Be silent, basically, right? There are all these picture words that you can actually understand what Elihu is saying. Don't say anything, just let me speak. Verse 32, if you have anything to say, then you can reply me. Speak, for I will take pleasure in justifying you. Now, this idea here in justifying you means this. It says, if you have anything that you want to say, I would vindicate you. Verse 32. To prove you are right. I think that would be a better way of saying it, right? I would take pleasure in proving you are right. If not, listen to me, stay silent, and I will teach you wisdom. This is the beginning of how Elihu is going to speak to Job. He is taking a different stance. He is suggesting that maybe Job might have missed what God said in his dream. Maybe Job might have missed out what God is trying to communicate in his current predicament. Elihu is not saying what is happening is because of sin. Elihu is suggesting that something may be happening, don't know what, but God wants to say something to you, and you should pay attention to God. That would be what we will end with chapter 33 today. And next week, we will continue with chapter 34. With this, we've come to the end of our session today.